and welcome to this lesson on the basics of Git. Well, we'll introduce Git, and by the end of this lesson, you'll understand not only what Git is, but also the basics of how it is designed and operates. So, let us begin. In this lesson, we'll cover the following topics. First, we'll define Git and explain what it does. Next, we'll talk about Linus Torvalds, the creator of Git, and why he created it in the first place. Then, we'll discuss how Git is designed and operates versus how most other systems like it work. Then, we'll discuss how to interact with Git, how its commands work, and then finally, we'll list some free sites that you can use to host Git projects. So, let us first ask, what is Git? And the description from the main page of Git's website is a good place to start. And it says, Git is a free and open source distributed version control system designed to handle everything from small to very large projects with speed and efficiency. But now after reading that, it raises the question of what is distributed, and it raises the question of what is a version control system, and we'll answer that first question about what is distributed later in this lesson. For now, a version control system is, as the description from Git's documentation states below, a system for tracking changes to a file or a set of files for later use if needed. Now, to understand where Git comes from, we must first talk about Linus Torvalds, the creator of Git. Linus Torvalds is most well known for being the creator of the Linux kernel, which powers most servers worldwide, all Android devices, and a plethora of other devices. As his role as the developer and maintainer of the Linux kernel, he needed a system to maintain the versions of the code that he was using. Previously, he used a system called BitKeeper, which was free for open source projects to use, but itself wasn't open source. And then people complained about that. So, Linus wrote Git in 2 weeks as a command line tool for Linux, which has since been ported to other operating systems, and has become, because of its speed and functionality, one of, if not the, major version control system used for tracking the source code. Now, let us go back to that question of what is distributed. If you aren't familiar with the term and how it's applied in computer science, then let us give a brief introduction to it here, so that you will understand the design goals of Git and how those often don't match the exact realities of how people use Git. First, let us just say that each separate set of files being tracked is called a repository, or repo for short. Each repository has a full copy of every file, and every version of every file in it. Technically, it doesn't actually use up that much disk space, because it uses advanced algorithms to save space and reduce duplication. But from a conceptual level, every file and all of its versions exist in each and every copy of the repository. Traditionally, most source code version control systems were not designed this way. They were instead designed to be centralized, with the main server acting as the central authority of what is up to date and tracked. You can see the illustration below to get a better idea of how that works. Then, there is the Git model, where each and every copy of the repository can be an authoritative central repository just as much as every other one. This is the distributed model, shown below, connecting every dot with every other dot through a web of connections. This complete, unhierarchical organization of repositories, however, doesn't work well in most organizations, be they businesses, schools, small team projects, etc. So instead, most people use the ability of every repository to be the true repository and create a hybrid-like system called decentralized, shown in the middle of the 3 images below. This means that there is one central repository that everyone checks their changes into, not because of technology, but instead of by rules that they or others place upon them. Perhaps small teams have their own mini central repository that they check their files into, and then check those files or changes into the main repository when needed. That would be shown in the middle image as the outermost nodes connecting to a single node, and then that node connecting to the middle node. So, when you're using Git in the future, understand that it is designed for a distributed system, but is often implemented as decentralized. Now that we've talked about what Git is, where it's come from, and how it's often used, let us discuss how to interact and use Git. Git was written by the Linux kernel creator, so it was originally designed to work on Linux. And in Linux, everything can be, and often is, done by the command line. Therefore, Git was originally designed as a command line tool. Now, there are GUI or graphical user interfaces to assist you in using Git, but we'll first be teaching you the command line instructions. That way, you are familiar with the concepts and can easily use either the command line or the graphical user interfaces. Some examples of Git commands are listed here below, such as git status, git commit, git push. You'll see those in later lessons. And finally, let us list some sites where you can host free Git repositories. Each of these sites has different rules for what kind of repositories are free. They each have different web user interfaces, and each have different levels of support available if you wanted to pay for personal support. These are also by no means the only sites that exist for hosting Git repositories. In this course, we will be using GitLab for hosting our source code for you. The reason we did this is because they offer free private repositories for everyone. This means that you as learners can have private repositories on the same site as our code for free. But feel free to familiarize yourself with these and other sites that exist to host Git repositories. Now that we've completed this lesson, you should be familiar with the following topics which we discussed. We gave an introduction to Git, defining it and what a version control system was. We introduced Linus Torvalds and gave a brief history of why Git was created. We discussed what a distributed system is and compared it to a centralized and decentralized pattern. Then we discussed how we'll use command line instructions to interact with Git. And finally, we showed you 3 hosts where you can create repositories for archiving of your projects, and how we'll be using gitlab.com for hosting the source code from this course, where you can create free private repositories for backing up your code.